Alright guys, time for a quick, quotation marks, probably not game theory video. I see people in part of the coping mechanism trying to talk about, there's this idea, a lot of times this is said, and I'm going to disprove this. Every first version of a video game is bad. So why would Strive be any different? And the question is, when I hear this, I'm like, well, first of all, if this were true, if every first version of a video game was terrible, fighting game, why would you be shilling it in the first place? So you've already called your own bluff, so many of these shillers being like, yeah, well, we knew it was going to be bad because every first version of the game is bad. Well, if that's the case, then why have you been shilling it this whole time? Right? I think that stands to reason. But let's talk about this. Actually, think about this for a second. Is this actually true? Well, then now we have to establish what even counts as the first version of a game. I gave a, Jesus Christ, someone said something about wrestling and I just gave a fucking wrestling symbol. That was on accident. That's like when I accidentally do the rainbow. No homo, rainbow. Anyway, lost my train of thought. So let's actually think what actually counts as the first version of the game, because I think it's actually pretty ambiguous. Because nowadays, do you think Guilty Gear Strive coming out almost 2 years later, do you think when this game comes out, this even really counts as the first version of the game? I would say that's kind of a coping mechanism, dude. This is not the first version of this game at this point, dude. That is absolutely ridiculous. If you think about video games back in the day, man, you might have a beta before the game comes out. The beta comes out, right? I mean, the beta comes out, and then a month later the game comes out, right? Now you have games like you are excessively testing games for 6 months. Like I said, I want you to think about how ridiculous this is. And this is true, and it sounds ridiculous, and I'm sure some people think I'm lying or something if they don't actually know my story, if they haven't looked it up. I want you to literally think about a game like Dragon Ball FighterZ. I was able to predict the game just from watching a few beta matches, and I'm like, oh, this is going to work, you can do this, and I was telling everybody, just do this, I can tell it works. Do you realize I was able to, and people got to remember that my channel started to slowly grow, I guess, despite people talking shit about me. Like, there's always been people making up lies about me, all this kind of stuff, all these years. But Dragon Ball FighterZ, I destroyed, I've been in since Street Fighter 2. No one has ever fundamentally, from big combos to small combos to foundational to crazy, no one has ever destroyed a game tech-wise like I did Dragon Ball FighterZ. And I blew it up so badly that despite all the people making up lies about me, like they have all these other years for all these other things, that's how bad I blew this game up, that you couldn't even hide it because I was just in another fucking stratosphere. It was ridiculous, right? But I was able to do that because these games are too beta tested. There's too much footage out there that if you want to look, you can actually see what's going on. So a game like Dragon Ball FighterZ, 6 months of being beta tested, you can see what's going on if you know what you're looking for, dude. So a game like Guilty Gear Strive, this game's going to be almost 2 years old by the time it comes out. Do you really think this counts as the first version of the game? I don't. Now let's actually talk about this though. Let's talk about the argument, is every first version of the game bad, right? Is every first version of the game bad? Again, it could get more ambiguous. Ambiguous. Maybe you can't even speak English. Ambiguous. Maybe I'm thinking about titties. I'm thinking about getting my dick sucked right now. That's what I'm thinking about. I'm sorry, Clayton is a huge asshole. I'm about to get my dick sucked, and it doesn't matter. I'm still right, and you're wrong about these games. Doesn't matter. I don't got a huge penis, but you know what? It's still getting sucked. So it's irrelevant. Anyway, let's actually talk about this though. Is every first version of the game bad? Well, you know what? A lot of times, especially if you look at older games, I feel like there's actually even a precedent that people don't want to play the revisions because some of the revisions they've taken stuff out of. Look at a game like Street Fighter Alpha 3. The revisions of Street Fighter Alpha 3, people wanted the game to be cheap. I think Street Fighter Alpha 3 is retarded anyway. Like I said, I've talked about it before in game theory videos. Game is lost on me. I think it's the best. From a certain standpoint, I think it's the most interesting casual Street Fighter game of all time. I'll give it that, but competitively, I'm not horny about it, the game in general, but it's got some interesting ideas. But if you look at a game like Street Fighter Alpha 3, well, guess what? People don't actually like the revision of the game, and it's not played. Look at a game like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, they took out Urins Unblockables and all this kind of stuff. And guess what? People don't play the later versions of it, even though the first versions of the game suck. Now, is your argument that maybe, oh, well, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike isn't the first version, Street Fighter 3 counts, okay? Well, I mean, we're kind of picking and choosing here now, right? But I think I'm showing there is not a actual precedent for games always being bad, the first version. Because sometimes people like these other versions. Look at, and again, we're talking about our things like, just like, let's I want to think about let me think about like different cases of games I can remember what has changed just from beta, just because we're thinking about this. If we're talking about, I think around the time of Super Street Fighter 2, in the early version, if you're playing the world version, or is it the world and the Japanese version, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Geef has the reversal running spinning pile driver that automatically sucks you in, right? And then that's not another version, so I guess you would say that first version of the game, I mean, is that standard? I don't know. A game like Street Fighter Alpha 1, which is funny. I'm just thinking about, again, I'm kind of like just thinking about trying to like my thought process, or just like kind of a history almost of video games. Street Fighter Alpha 1 was a curious example because TZW, if you guys are old enough to remember that guy who used to do a lot of old Street Fighter combo videos, I don't know how he got his hand on it, but he actually, when they were promoting the game, his combo videos are using a beta version of the game, which is actually kind of incredible and pretty weird if you've ever seen these combo videos. Like Charlie has he can cancel his chain combos the whole time. But again, what is the first version of Street Fighter Alpha 1? Because if you recall, Street Fighter Alpha, they had the beta, and then a month later, the Japanese version came out, and then a week later, the American versions and everything that came out, and some guys' dizzy points were toned down, which is always funny because if you hear people talk about Street Fighter Alpha 1, they're like, oh yeah, I remember the arcades. Guy was, he just redizzied you all the time, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, so you're telling me you all lived in Japan where you played this very first version, or your arcade just so happened to have the very first version of Street Fighter Alpha 1 that was actually sold? Because if you just go to a week later that was like the more worldwide release, guy can still redizzy you, but this idea of the guy just dizzying you off of jabs doesn't even fucking work in the game. It's just, that's not what they changed the dizzy. So what is the first version of that game, right? Some might say, well, you know what I mean? The Japanese, obviously, they play the cheaper version. And they like the cheaper version, apparently. Go figure. It's the first version, they like it. Look at a game like Street Fighter Alpha 2. I don't know what the betas for Street Fighter Alpha 2 was, but Street Fighter Alpha 2 got Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold. People don't play Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, even though it's the later version of it. So is the first version of that game better? Look at a game like Reload. Again, we're just going through different games just to show there's not actually a precedent for this. I remember in the Reload beta, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Faust had an infinite. He could just suck you in every time. Sucked you in. Pun not intended, but take it. I think RoboKai had a glitch or something like that. Where did RoboKai have like an infinite 2 in that? I'm trying to think. RoboKai had some kind of weird glitch in that. Kai's throw had no damage buffer on it, so he could do like half-life off a throw or something like that. Soul's Gunflame was supposedly as fast as a miscancel, some bullshit like that. Of course, that stuff was taken out. I remember in Accent Core. No, was it Slash? I think was it Slash that Angie could always double butterfly in the beta. Angie could like triple double butterfly. He could just put his main butterfly as mine on the screen, and he could always cancel in and out of overhead and something else. I remember that, which didn't make it. What else? What are some other games? I remember CVS2. CVS2 is an interesting example because CVS2, again, games were not super beta tested, back then. It's just like the month before. I remember Ryu had a Shinshouken that had the blue flash on it, like the movie, which is, I wonder why they took that out. Maybe people didn't like it, but Ryu actually had a blue flash when he did the Shinshouken in the beta. And they actually, this is kind of funny too, they had found roll canceling, that roll canceling made you invincible supposedly in the beta. And Capcom was like, oh, well, no one's ever going to do this, so don't worry about it. Which is curious because if you recall, in CVS1, roll canceling is actually in CVS1 that I remember. But the only character that could do anything with it was Benimaru because it didn't actually make you invincible but Benimaru could roll cancel, and there was a glitch with his super where I want to say his roll actually hit you while he was rolling. Does anyone remember that? Again, I'm trying to remember the history of random bugs. But CVS2 is interesting because I remember after the beta, people were talking about, oh, and Bison has this paint the fence thing, which is weird because that doesn't seem like a bug to me, so I don't know why people would complain about that anyway. That just is like, okay, that's how A group works. But people had found, roll canceling, and roll canceling actually still made you invincible in CVS2, unlike CVS1. But they're like, no one's ever going to do this. What a dumb man. They look like a fucking retard for that. No one will ever do this. The game comes out in a month. Don't worry about it. No one's ever going to learn that shit. What are some other things? I mean, look at a game like Dragon Ball FighterZ. What is even the first version of Dragon Ball FighterZ? Again, the game was beta tested for 6 months. So what counts as the first version of Dragon Ball FighterZ? I mean, technically, if you're talking about the game that was finally released, I think from a certain standpoint, gameplay-wise and mechanic-wise, if we're just talking about the official release of Dragon Ball FighterZ, again, taking away double supers, putting in rules to how you're allowed to tag, all this kind of stuff, you know what I mean, afterwards like that, it's like, well, maybe characters are pick and choose better in later versions of the game, but gameplay-wise, toning down synergy, all this kind of stuff, is the game, I think you could pick and choose for that from a certain standpoint, actually. And man, thinking about Dragon Ball Z beta, I mean, some of the stuff that changed, reflecting, you could apparently just instantly cancel, I remember. A funny thing, so many people complain about auto combos in Dragon Ball FighterZ. If you recall, and I posted about this too, go look at my post back in the day, man. You hear people complain about auto combos now. Do you remember in the beta of Dragon Ball FighterZ, dynamics, when you did an auto combo, always gave you a super, and you could keep looping dynamics. Do you remember that? And I remember I posted that. I'm like, this is a huge problem. And I'm like, dude, they're gonna have to get rid of this. Some people are like, oh no, it's not that bad. That would never happen. Can you imagine the shit show that people would talk shit about Dragon Ball FighterZ if they had not gotten rid of that, dude? Can you imagine that? Because then the final version of only Trunks could loop dynamics, and it didn't always give you a Dragon Ball. It didn't continuously build meter. But man, you hear people complain about auto combos now. And people were saying I was going to be wrong about that if they left it, and they're like, oh, that's not a problem. Auto combos aren't that good. Not that I think that, but considering how much people complain about auto combos. Of course, there was the Dragon Restore, all this other stuff that was originally posted by me. But anyway, I'm just trying to get at the whole idea that every first version of a game is ambiguous. Because first of all, what counts as the first version of the game? Games are so ridiculously beta tested nowadays. That's ambiguous. I don't consider this the first version of Strive, and I don't think you should either. The game's all going to be almost 2 years old. That's ridiculous. This is not the first version. This is not like back in the day where you had like a month. And then you go to the person like, oh, the first version's always bad. Well, worse than, well, you know what? Look at games that people don't play. People don't play the newer versions of Third Strike. They don't play the newer versions of Street Fighter Alpha 3. So there's not a precedent for this kind of stuff either. And then, of course, it all goes back to if it's so obvious that the first version of the game sucks, are you admitting that you just ridiculously shilled this whole thing, and it's like you're admitting that you fucking lied then, right? Did you get what I'm getting at? Anyway, as usual, the fighting game community, I feel like I'm getting stupider and stupider. So many comments that they just make me stupider and stupider when I fucking read this shit. But anyway, point is, I talk a lot about precedents in games. And if you're going to make the precedent for an argument, I hope there is actually a precedent that you know what the fuck you're talking about. Most people don't know what the fuck they're talking about, and they'll act like something is fact. And obviously, this is pretty ambiguous. It's not really clear cut that every first version of the game is worse. And fuck, dude, I mean, this doesn't even have to go for fighting games. Do all video games get better as they progress on? Sonic gets better. Look at Mega Man X. Does Mega Man X get better? I don't know about that shit, dude. I mean, me and a friend were talking about this recently. A lot of times I'm tempted, sometimes when I think about video games on a grand scale, sometimes I think that a game like Mega Man X might be, I mean, I'm sure it's one of the most greatest video games of all time, but sometimes when I try to think about it logically, I'm almost like, is the original Mega Man X, when you just take it for what it is Is Mega Man X the original game? Like maybe even the greatest video game of all time? Sometimes I think that, like, what an incredible game Mega Man X was when it first came out. And did the series actually get better? I don't think so. So I don't think it's true for fighting games. I don't think it's true for video games in general. I think you guys are coping. You can't have a real conversation about video games. The end.